The refereeing decision to award Liverpool a penalty in the 20th second of the Champions League final is the worst decision in Champions League final history. And I'm okay with it. And let me be perfectly clear about something before I continue. The call was wrong, alright? It was the wrong call. It should not have been awarded. First, the referee was not in a good position to see the play. If you watch the replay and look at the referee's position, there's no way he saw the entirety of the play. Had he been in front of Sissoko, that is to say, with Sissoko and the referee facing each other, he might have seen that the ball hit Sissoko's chest first, then his outstretched arm. But he didn't, because he wasn't. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the ref was trash because he wasn't in that spot. I'm not saying the referee was wrong for not being there in that particular place at that particular time. I'm just saying he wasn't in the right place to make the call with any certainty. In other words, because he did not see the whole play, he could only call what he saw. And that was the handball. And he made the call he thought was right, but he was in fact wrong. Second of all, it hits Sissoko's chest first, then hits his arm. Now, we've seen many times, if you watch any soccer on TV at all, where the ball strikes a player on the leg, the foot, the knee, or other body part, then hits their arm or their hand. And how many times are those called? Sometimes. It's hard to say. Sometimes they're called, sometimes they aren't. That brings me to point number 3. The call was wrong because of the timing. All right? If that particular type of call is sometimes called, sometimes not, then the decision has to come from a plethora of subjective elements that relate to that particular alleged violation. Unquestionably, one of those elements has to be timing. So that very exact call in a game between Crystal Palace and Everton in the middle of October, that's a bad call. That exact call in a game in the Champions League group stage is a terrible call. But that call in the Champions League final is unconscionable. It's 100% changed the game. You know, if it wasn't called in the 60th minute, it wasn't called in the 40th minute, not even the 20th minute. It was the first 20 seconds of the single most important club football match in the world. Now, wait a friggin' second. You're asking yourself, if it's such a bad call, the worst call in Champions League final history, period, how could you be okay with it? That's because refereeing is a subjective art. Again, you're asking yourself, how can it be subjective if there are rules, black and white rules, that say what is a foul and what isn't? What is a goal and what isn't? What is out of bounds and what isn't? How to throw the ball in. And you're right. There are some rules that are not open to interpretation. Out of bounds is out of bounds. Did the ball cross the line in its entirety? If the answer is yes, the ball is out of bounds. If not, then it isn't. It's yes or no, and it leaves 0 to interpretation. Now, of course, whether the ball actually crossed the line is very much a judgment call. The referee has to make a split-second decision. Sometimes that call is right, sometimes it's wrong. But the point is, with some rules, it is black and white. Some other rules, however, are entirely subjective. Fouls. What is a foul? Let's read Law 12 of the International Football Association Board's Law of the Game. Fouls and misconduct. It states, and I quote, "A direct free kick is awarded if a player commits any of the following offenses against an opponent in a manner considered by the referee to be careless, reckless, or using excessive force." And then it lists a bunch of stuff, like headbutting, kicking, biting, kicking at, biting, etc., etc., etc. But let's take a really close look at the key language. It states, in a manner considered by the referee to be careless, reckless, or using excessive force. That tells us something incredibly important. This is discretionary. It is subjective, because what I consider careless may not be what you consider careless. In fact, I'd wager to say if you take 10 different people and you show them the same clip, same video clip of an event in a soccer game, you will get 4 or 5 different answers as to if something is careless or reckless, or maybe neither. So when interpreting fouls, referees use their reasonable judgment to determine whether an act constitutes a foul or not. That includes handballs. Now, some people out there want football, and look, I know I keep fluctuating between calling the sport football and soccer, but we all know what I'm talking about. They want football to become this sterile sport where we always know whether everything is or isn't a foul, where every call will be a yes or no. Yes foul, no foul. Yes handball, no handball. Yes offside, no offside. For some things I agree. A goal should be yes or no, and we have that technology. Offside should be yes or no, because it's an objective decision. Was the attacking player further than the second to last defender when the ball was played? That's determinable and leaves nothing to interpretation. Yes, it does, right? As with every other rule in the sport, but if it isn't left up to the referee's discretion technically. But fouls and misconduct specifically, and indisputably, they leave everything. They leave all the decision making to the referee. It's still human. And that's what sport is about. Otherwise, just turn on a computer simulation and watch that instead. And I insist that the human element be extended to the referee. Players make decisions, sometimes good, sometimes bad. They lose their tempers and get sent off. They choose to pass instead of shoot. They miss hit shots and crosses. It's all part of the game. Why would we try to rid the sport of that? Importantly, it's impossible. Players aren't machines, though some of them are so technically gifted they resemble them. In fact, we as fans demand that the players play with passion. Machines don't have passion. Computer simulations don't have passion. Humans have passion. How many times did we hear Manchester United fans this season just say that they wish their players played with a little more passion? It's part of the game. So why do we try to take that human element away from the referee? As an aside, no computer would get the calls 100% right anyway. So let me give you an example. Have you ever played FIFA, the video game? In that game, a handball is a handball. Let me read another excerpt from the IFAB laws of the game. Same law. Law 12. It is not usually an offense if the ball touches a player's hand or arm when a player falls and the hand arm is between the body and the ground to support the body. In other words, if you're getting up and you're using your arms to pick yourself up. If you've ever played FIFA, you know the computer does not comport to this rule. If the ball touches your player's arm in the game, it's a handball. Period. All the time. Every time. No matter where or how. The computer doesn't know if the handling of the ball was intentional or if the arm made the body unnaturally bigger. It doesn't care if the ball ricochets off one player to the hand or arm of the other, and it doesn't make a judgment call about if the other player was close enough for it to constitute a handball. The computer only knows if it touched the hand, arm or if it didn't, and if it touches, it makes the call. But according to the rules of the game, that's incorrect. That's not how you make the decision. Now, how on earth are you supposed to create a program that determines if a handball was deliberate or not? You can't. That sort of AI doesn't exist. Unlike goal line technology, we have no sensor that can tell us, without the shadow of a doubt, whether the ball crossed the line or not. The ball crossed the line or it didn't cross. The watch vibrates or it doesn't. It can be like 2 millimeters of a difference between a goal or no goal, and it can still tell you with 100% accuracy. Just ask Liverpool and Manchester City. Simply, it is impossible for that to happen with fouls. Fouls remain a subjective beast. No computer program or mathematical algorithm will ever be able to properly call fouls. Calling fouls is inherently human because only a human can gauge intent. Trying to make it into a binary yes or no, black-white evolution is not only impossible, it's dumb. Stripping it down to a mechanical, calculated sport would ruin the sport. It would cause incessant stoppages where a computer would determine if my shoulder to shoulder with another player was actually careless or reckless. And this is why I'm against VAR. VAR pretends to be that eye in the sky that will correct the referee indiscretions, but it's really just another dude watching TV screens. Perhaps VAR can see things that the center ref missed, but in the end, it's still discretionary. It doesn't remove the human element. All it does is slow the game down. So, in my opinion, VAR is only useful in situations where time and space are in question, like a buzzer beater in basketball, or whether or not the whole ball crossed the goal line for a goal. But it can never correct discretionary calls because even those corrections are discretionary. It has to be a clear and obvious error. What is clear and obvious? Is it clear and obvious to you? It's not clear and obvious to me. Let's bring this full circle. Calling the penalty against Sissoko was 100% discretionary. For example, if Sissoko had done the same thing in Liverpool's half in the 60th minute, no one in the world would have called it controversial. The call would have been made, and that would have been the end of it. But that same call in Tottenham's penalty box, 20 seconds into the game, was 100% controversial. It was a judgment call by the referee, the wrong call. But in the end, I would rather a wrong call that remains in the hands of a human being than stripping away the very thing that makes football football. The human element is what makes it a spectacle. It's what makes us passionate about the sport. Our humanity, the players' humanity, so why not the refs? Awarding Liverpool a penalty 20 seconds into the Champions League final is the worst call in the history of the tournament, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Let's move on to why the World Cup doesn't matter. The Gold Cup. It doesn't matter. The Gold Cup is now officially the most pointless trophy in international football. It's like the points in Whose Line Is It Anyways? And to be fair, it was always a pretty crap competition. It felt too samey. It was never really fair to the smaller countries, always giving advantage to Mexico and the US. And barring some debacle from both of those countries, the winner was always going to come from the US or Mexico. And now, added to the already inherent uselessness and inadequacy of the tournament, the thing really doesn't matter anymore. Because before the winner of the Gold Cup, I'll keep calling it the World Cup, the Gold Cup. Before the winner of the Gold Cup won a trip to the Confederations Cup, a mini tournament often called the last rehearsal before the World Cup, where teams got this amazing advantage by playing in the same stadium they would be playing in during the World Cup and getting their feet wet before all the other teams. In reality, the Confed Cup never gave such an advantage. It was just another international tournament. However, it was a chance to compete against big-time opponents with a pedigree. If it really didn't give you an advantage for the upcoming World Cup, it at least let you play the best international teams in the world a year before the World Cup and test your players and your game plan against more varied teams, structures, formations, strategies than what you're used to in continental qualifying. And for teams like Mexico and the US, that was particularly important because, let's be honest, playing against El Salvador and Guyana isn't going to prepare you for Germany or Nigeria or Argentina. But now the Confed Cup is kaput. No mas. It's gone. Now there's no carrot at the end of the stick. It's just a stupid stick. So what's the whole point of it? I mean, nothing at all. It's a rigged competition, heavily favoring the favorites, intended not to be a great continental spectacle, but to make CONCACAF cash. And since for the first time since 1993, Mexico is not invited to the Copa America, Mexico in particular have nothing to look forward to aside from this farce of a competition. So what I'm suggesting for Mexico, and for the US too, for that matter, is to treat this joke of a tournament as a bunch of friendlies. Now listen, I know how pretentious this sounds. Other teams are actually going to come out and try to win the thing, but it's not in our best interest. And here when I say our, I'm talking about both the US and Mexico. It's in our best interest to use this as a testing ground for younger players and up-and-comers. So look, Mexico gains nothing from winning this. Bragging rights? Pff, pff, pff. At this point in CONCACAF's history, that means literally less than nothing. Saying you're the best team in CONCACAF right now is like me saying I'm the tallest person at a preschool. It's not something to brag about. The U.S. comes into this tournament in its lowest state since I can remember properly paying attention to international soccer. Like when I was a kid, I didn't pay attention to the U.S. team. It was a laughingstock. Of course, we all know that changed in the 2000s with the U.S. heyday, arguably at the end of the 2000s, at beginning of 2010s. And look, I'm not trying to kick a man while he's down, all right? I'm just building up to a point that I'm trying to make. Maybe a little bit. Maybe I'm kicking a man while he's down a little bit. But coming off what is undoubtedly the lowest moment in the program's history and limping into this tournament off the back of two really embarrassing losses to lesser teams, U.S. fans cannot be feeling good about this. So forget about it. Just forget about it. It's not about winning the tournament for you. It's about letting Berhalter get some real-life experience with his kids. Look, this team sucks, okay? The players aren't any good. Some of them are good. Some of them are really good, but the team itself, it's not very good. That doesn't mean it can't get better, though. Berhalter hasn't gotten through enough time with the players. He hasn't established a system he likes with the players that adhere to his system. It's a process. I am a huge advocate of giving coaches time to settle into the job. I've always said this. Anytime things go bad, everyone always blames the coach. Nobody has that moment of self-reflection and patience. We live in a time where patience is not a virtue anymore. Right? We gotta give coaches time to settle into the job and to give them the time to either teach their system to the players and for the players to learn the system, or to get rid of the players that won't or can't buy into the system or learn the system, and then find players who will. This takes a little less time in the club game. Maybe a season, sometimes more in club football. But it takes even more time in international football because of the gaps in time between practice sessions and meetings between players and the coaching staff. It takes longer to get a system to work in international football. Everyone knows this. This is why I don't approve of the frustration of the fans against the team. Booing your team off at halftime is classless. All right? You want to be mad at someone, be mad at the USSF. Not the players, not the staff. And I mean, okay, the players are, of course, the ones directly responsible for kicking the ball and making the plays. So, of course, they must shoulder responsibility. But I think it's a little unfair to them and to the coaching staff to boo them now. The cycle is just getting underway for the U.S. Like, for other teams, maybe the cycle started earlier, but you guys just hired your coach recently. He hasn't had enough time. I think you got to give Berhalter a chance. That's all I'm saying. As for Mexico, we're coming into this with such a freaking depleted squad. I'm not even going to get into the players who refuse to call up. All right? Because I'm not going to spend 45 minutes on that rant. But even without the refusals, we just have so many injuries, and it's going to cause a lot of issues. Unlike the U.S. team, we're not facing as big of a crisis because we're not coming off a Miss World Cup, We actually have a good manager who's actually already good and doesn't need to prove it. On the other hand, we don't have those bright potential future stars the U.S. has. In other words, we don't have a lot of promising youth that we could give time to in this tournament to see if they're good enough. We just don't have that many promising youth coming through our system. And that's a whole different topic for another day. But with all the injuries and absences, we also don't have a clear-cut chance to work on our system. There are too many missing key players. So we're kind of stuck in this flux of we're not giving youth a chance, but we're also not using this as a test for the full A team because half of our best players aren't even here. So if anything, this edition of the Gold Cup is a perfect chance for a team not called the US or Mexico to win the tournament. Maybe some of the usual suspects like Canada, Costa Rica, or Panama finally come out and take what is within their grasp. Or maybe it's a surprising candidate, I don't know. Who knows? Now, Jonathan Dos Santos, he expects Mexico to face the US in the final, and to that I say, shut up. You don't get to talk anymore unless you go back to Europe, so shut your freaking mouth, stop talking. But seriously, I would be very shocked to see if Mexico and the US both reach the final. I just would. If we do, I don't care. If we don't, I also don't care. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised to find myself tuning into the Copa America more often than our own Gold Cup.